I want to welcome to the program Saurin Nanavati. Thank you this morning for joining us on If This Food Could Talk. How are you, Saurin?
I'm doing good. I'm just coming back from a trip from Rwanda. And so adjusting to the time zone. I actually came down with COVID immediately after the trip, so I'm coming out of that little COVID portal and this is really my first conversation after being laid out for a week. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, well, that there was a lot that just went into that. So how was Rwanda? Let me ask you that. How was it and how long were you there?
I was there for 2 weeks. It was a wonderful trip. We have an office, so I'm the founder of a small boutique design firm called Ethos, and we have offices here in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon, in Amsterdam, and in Kigali, Rwanda. And in our office in Kigali, Rwanda, it's like a coffee learning lab, and we also use it for learning journeys. So in this particular trip, we brought a team from Haiti to Rwanda, so they had some exposure to um, kind of what's possible after after a country goes through obviously a traumatic event. In the case of Rwanda, 30 years ago, they had the genocide. Coming out of the genocide, there was a strong promotion of the coffee sector, and the coffee sector is really a symbol for progress in Rwanda. So we exposed the team from Haiti to the Rwandan coffee sector. We showed them different aspects of how cooperatives have developed, how the sector has developed, how development and trade go together, and really just gave the team first a little break because working in Haiti is extremely difficult and extremely stressful. So just allowing them to relax and reflect, and then also start dreaming up what is possible, and knowing that if you're seeing a case like Rwanda, you can perhaps have a little bit more hope for what is possible in Haiti.
Okay, that is really beautiful. How did you find your Haitian team
Oh,
from Rwanda?
I actually worked in Haiti for several years, from 2011 to 2014. And during that time, uh, worked directly with coffee cooperatives there. I was part of another organization at the time, and my job was to set up a team in Haiti after there was just a terrible earthquake that happened in 2010. So our job was to kind of
Right.
promote agribusiness development post that natural disaster. And that led me to working directly with coffee cooperatives there, coffee and cocoa.
Was this your first time entering into the coffee industry? Were you working in coffee before that, or specifically agriculture, just on a broader level?
I had been working, I guess, in coffee since 2010. My first
Okay.
real exposure to coffee was in 2009. I was working in Uganda, and I was researching food security. And the farms in Uganda that I was kind of looking at, like what were different plants that were affected by diseases, were also growing coffee. And so one of the researchers that was with me was a huge coffee connoisseur. And every time he had a chance, he would like sneak off and hang out amongst the coffee trees. And so I just through his passion, I became very interested in coffee and in food systems. So how coffee is a cash crop, and in specifically with a lot of smallholder agriculture or smallholder farmers, they'll mix cash crops with food crops. So I became interested in these food systems that allow farmers to basically generate income from various sources, and coffee was one of those
So,
sources.
what do you mean, like for the average listener out there, when you say coffee is a cash crop? What does that mean exactly?
Sure. Um, I would say the easiest way is that it's not eaten locally. So most most farmers are growing food for their local consumption and to sell in the local market. And then you'll also have a cash crop that is typically exported. And most cash crops that are typically exported, just like coffee, are relics of colonialism. And so some years it's very favorable to have coffee growing alongside your other crops, and some years when the market's down, it's less favorable. So you have to always
Mhm.
kind of balance having this mix of crops that you can sell locally and obviously that you can consume, and crops that you
Mhm.
can export. Because when you're exporting crops, it almost acts as like a balloon payment for a farming family. And so once a season, you're able to sell your coffee and you get this influx of money that you then use for perhaps paying your children's school fees or paying some type of
Mhm.
larger expense because you have all the money that's coming in at once.
So help me to understand. I've never been through a coffee harvest. Is it once a year for most countries, or do they can you harvest throughout
Sure.
the year?
So,
Everywhere?
coffee takes about, I would say, 3 to 4 years to mature as a plant. I'm
Mhm.
specifically talking
Mhm.
about Arabica coffee. So there's two kind of major types of coffee. There's Arabica and Robusta. Robusta mainly grows in Vietnam. There's also a large amount of Robusta that comes out of Uganda and also Brazil. But in the coffee that we typically drink in the United States, it's Arabica coffee. And that's what you would see at like the cafes or at Starbucks, and less so in like Folgers or some of these like uh, kind of I would say brands that are less expensive. They'll have a mix of
Mhm.
Robusta and Arabica, so that's a bit of a blend. They're
Okay.
sometimes called like Robusta, like a filler coffee, and so it has a high caffeine content, but it's less expensive. So then they mix it with some Arabica, and that's how you'll get like a Folgers. But the
Makes sense.
Arabica coffees that we drink in cafes, the ones that are sometimes referred to as specialty coffees, um, take about 4 years to mature. And then the harvest
Mhm.
really depends on where in the hemisphere you're at. So, well, where in the world you're at, which hemisphere you're in. So in our hemisphere, it's typically the harvest season is around October to maybe late December, early January. And the higher
Okay.
the altitude, the longer it takes for coffee to mature. So I guess it has to do with
Mhm.
like the density. The higher the altitude, I guess the more dense the bean is. And so the highest altitude coffees, which are grown around 2,000 meters, 6,000 feet,
Mhm.
usually come in later in the season towards that January
Sure.
period. And then in East Africa, the harvest period, I believe, is somewhere from like April to uh, July, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when you talk about the cash crop for the farmer, they've got just that one period where they're growing once a year to harvest and get as much cash for their product that they're going to export. Is that about right?
Yeah. And that's about
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're you are and I kind of want to take a step back. I want you in your own words. I know that we've already heard about you that you teach and are a research fellow at Carnegie Mellon. But how did you decide to become this fair trade of coffee warrior?
Well, I guess it's more being a romantic around cooperatives. Cooperatives
Mm.
are um, essentially organizations that aggregate from groups of farmers to give them more of a more collective bargaining rights. So when you're a member of a cooperative, you might get discounts on inputs, more affordable credit, access to training, perhaps
Mhm.
special projects that are associated with community development, and you're also able to collectively sell your coffee in this particular case. And I started working with cooperatives through organic cotton in 2005, I think, 2005, 2006.
Oh.
I worked in the cotton belt of India, what's also known as the suicide belt. And I got involved in
Suicide
the suicide
belt?
belt because there's epidemic of farmers basically drinking pesticides as a way to get out of long-term debt. And so this and suicide in rural areas is actually a lot more common than people know. It's to work in a
Mm,
rural area and to always kind of you always have to finance your crop. And there's things that can go wrong, like droughts or weather conditions,
mhm,
and
mhm,
forces farming families to double down on that financing. And sometimes, in some countries, you cannot get out of that debt, and you essentially become bonded labor to whoever your creditor is. And this has caused large numbers of people to commit suicide. And so I was invited to work in a cotton cooperative that was promoting organic fair trade cotton through a Dutchman. His name is Heis Spoor, and he's still a great friend of mine, and certainly a mentor that educated me on cooperative systems and organic agriculture. And through that experience of just kind of working directly with a cooperative, seeing the potential of cooperatives, understanding that there is really, cooperatives come out of like almost survival, and
yeah.
the only ability for farmers to gain visibility is to come together and work
Mhm,
collectively. I I kind of fell in love with the cooperative movement, and the emblem of that cooperative movement is fair trade. So fair trade has a certain number of
okay.
principles associated with cooperative development. So they promote, long-term relationships between buyers and cooperatives. So those cooperatives can rely on the sale of a good year after year. Uh, they provide a minimum support price, so they know that the farmers at least are able to cover their
Mm,
costs of production. Um, they promote democratic governance systems, and they promote reinvestment back into the communities. So these are some core principles of fair trade. So,
mhm.
and because there's that fair trade emblem, they get visibility. It's a platform for cooperatives to basically sell their goods to international markets.
And fair trade is an international
Yes.
emblem, so all these cooperatives are more regional, but they have to apply to become part of the fair trade
Yes, they
program?
do. It's actually a pretty rigorous
Okay.
program, and you get audited once a year. And based on basically a continuous improvement plan, these cooperatives are able to gain more market access and obviously organize themselves, because the fair trade certification, I think by its very nature, allows cooperatives to kind of better understand the requirements of international markets.
Fair. So is one of your missions is to try to get more consumers out there who are not producing coffee, but consuming coffee to focus on that fair trade emblem
Well, yeah,
when
I
buying?
think,
Yeah.
in the United States, we don't have a lot of consumer education and awareness around the importance of fair trade. And I would say more so around organic. And so this combination of fair trade, organic coffee, I think is a winning combination, because
Hmm.
they both provide premiums to farmers. Fair trade looks at the cooperative. But organic is really a premium that goes directly to a farmer based on their farming practices that are aligned with the organic um, certification principles.
Okay. So we got that. Uh, Individuals can go look for the fair trade organic symbols on their packages. What happens with the larger companies, the mass buyers, the Starbucks of the worlds? How do you happen to know if they are purchasing fair trade organic coffees, or is that still, it becomes a financial question, affordability, profitability?
Well, some
And I don't mean to signal out just Starbucks, obviously. It's just the one that we know probably
I've worked
most
with most of
as
the
coffee
bigger
consumers.
companies over time. my
Yeah.
career has taken me to helping design sustainability programs for different corporates, and Starbucks was one.
Good. Great.
Starbucks promotes cafe practices. So that's really an internal verification scheme that they've developed that has a set of criteria that meets what Starbucks is looking for in terms of a supplier. You
Mhm.
can you'll see AAA, that is the one that Nespresso uses. Um, you also have certification bodies like Rainforest Alliance, which is that little green
Mhm.
frog. So there's
Mhm.
different
Mhm.
there's different certification schemes uh, based on what the end buyer is looking for. And I think that sometimes if you're a big enough company, it's easier to create your own certification scheme and kind of keep that information internal. And you really probably they're probably trying to protect the sources that they're um, buying coffee from. And then
Mm.
there's others that use these international labels as proxies for their own certification scheme, and that would be Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance.
Mm.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Um, Talk to us a little bit about the farmers. What has commoditization of coffee done? What does their lives look like right now, or in your experience?
Sure. Commoditization, I would the way I would explain it, it's an extension of colonialism. So coffee is a colonial crop, um, spread around
Mhm.
the world through basically starting from India, they say, and kind of moved around to Indonesia and over to East Africa and then over to West Africa. And then finally, like Haiti was a huge coffee producing country for a while, and then all the way down through Central and South America.
Mhm.
And it is, because it's a colonial crop, obviously the coffee is grown in those regions because they're tropical regions and they're kind of coffee growing regions, but it's also an area in which you can it, keep your costs down, right? There's not a lot of labor
Mhm.
rights. There's not a lot of environmental rights. So commoditization of coffee is just really thinking of coffee as just a raw material, and that raw material that you want to keep at as low a cost as possible. And so that comes at the expense of farmers. And
Sure.
coffee is majority grown by small scale producers. So that means that they have less than 2 hectares, less than 5 acres of land
Mhm.
under cultivation.
Mm.
And a portion of that land grows coffee. But these farmers many times are not subject to like international labor laws or any kind of um they're trying to survive. They're trying to survive, and sometimes that will come at the expense of cutting down forest. It comes at the expense of child labor. And so we see a lot of
Right.
this in coffee growing areas. Now, coffee right now is historically at a high price. Coffee is traded through Arabica coffee again is traded through the New York International Commodities Exchange, and
Mm.
and so that there's price volatility right now due
Mhm.
to the production in Brazil and Vietnam. Coffee prices are relatively high, but that could easily go away. And so it really stinks as a small scale producer because every year you don't know what the base price of coffee is going to be, what they call the C price. And you can imagine like the costs of fertilizers continue to go up. The cost of living just goes up across in
It
the
totally
world.
does. Inflation everywhere.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But if you don't know what the cost of what you're selling is going to be year over year, it becomes extremely risky. And so commoditization of any crop puts the small scale producers at extreme risk.
A couple weeks ago, I had the pleasure of speaking to Etel Higgene. She's from Coffee Watch, and she painted a pretty grim picture about child labor and slave labor, specifically down in Brazil, but all over on the coffee, and on these coffee farms. And she painted exactly the same picture you're talking about. It's just if the prices are so low, this is what exactly happens. These children and migrant workers often come, they're taken as bonded labor, promised a job. They just get there, then they have to be purchase their own rakes, or they have to purchase their own. So then they become indebted to the people who pick them up on the truck from the city to take them out to these farms. It was a pretty grim picture, and it really opened my eyes to how hard it can get out there.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the
Mm,
country. Many
yeah.
countries that, they're using the bordering countries that are less fortunate to be their labor force during the coffee
Yeah.
harvest. So perhaps in the Dominican Republic, they are using Haitians, or in Costa Rica, they're using Nicaraguans. And so it really depends on who's in need of the money, he's
Like,
willing to travel and put themselves at risk, leave their families and leave their home territories in search of any income that they can get. And then that risk that you're taking can be totally taken advantage of. And the coffee price
yeah.
dictates that, I think, to a large degree. And the fact that there's not many social safety nets, especially for coffee
Mm,
workers. They're the ones that
right.
like no one talks about. There's coffee farmers, they own the land, but they all need to find
Right.
workers to work that land. Even small scale producers, they'll have their family working the land, but then other families that are in nearby farms will kind of chip in, and you kind of just rotate and support each other to work each other's lands. But in many cases, they'll also use migrant labor that's available.
Sure.
Yeah.
When coffee's treated as a commodity, how's the value chain? Whose voices are kind of missing from that value chain? How can we increase the amount of value and spread it more evenly across that line, that chain?
Yeah. Well, I would say that the 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 biggest missing voices are those of um the farmers and the farming families and the farm workers
Mhm.
that we were just speaking of. I would say other voices that are extremely important that we don't really acknowledge, but are certainly fundamental to coffee is the voice of the land itself, the voice of biodiversity, and the
Mm,
voice of water resources that are associated with either responsible production of coffee, or water gets contaminated with irresponsible production of coffee or processing of coffee. So these are voices that, if there are certifications, if there's international development aid, if there's nonprofit organizations that are participating in promoting sustainable coffee, those voices might get amplified a little bit more, and there is a little bit more recognition for the landscapes that produce coffee, the biodiversity that's associated with those landscapes, and the people.
well, I hadn't thought about all the resources that were used to make that singular bean that we, yeah, that's a very good point. Talk to me. You actually just spoke on a TED Talk. You had a TED Talk recently, isn't that right?
Yeah, it was fun.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
huge. That's huge. Talk to us about it. It was called The Sacred Seed, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly.
Um, it was a TEDx talk at Carnegie Mellon University, so I was honored to be selected and have a chance to speak about kind of my relationship with coffee over the years, and I highlighted just a few of the origins that have a different narrative. When I think of coffee, and one of the things I study at Carnegie Mellon is systems. And so I think of coffee not so much as a supply chain, but as a system. And a coffee system is, in the most simplest terms, a web of relationships. And those webs of relationships can be arranged and into different configurations. And we then use narrative to interpret that configuration. So you can take a coffee system and arrange it into a supply chain, and then the narrative we use are words like commodity, or we're using, capitalistic kind of language to demonstrate how coffee goes from a raw material into a processed finished good that is consumed. And so that is a type of configuration in a coffee system. But there's other types of configurations. In Ethiopia, coffee is very much drank ceremoniously. So it's drinking in ceremony. And when you drink coffee, it is a way to practice a set of values that are very, I guess, specific to the culture of Ethiopia. Those values are
Mm.
associated with hospitality, community,
Mhm.
and respect. In other cultures that I work in, such as I work with indigenous groups in Colombia, coffee is a plant, and plants are sentient. And so it has a spirit, and that spirit of coffee is conscious. And when we consume coffee, it comes together with our own consciousness and is able to express itself. And so it will express itself through the the mindfulness and the values that we're putting on it. So for me, I love to drink coffee with friends. So coffee becomes
Yeah.
this tool for friendship. It becomes a tool for meaning making. It becomes a tool for reflection. And so that there's something more than just the consumption of a seed and water. It's actually, we're consuming the essence of the landscape and the people that cultivated it.
Serene, that is beautiful. That seriously is beautiful. I love
Not my
that.
view, but
You
I
know, we've
certainly love it. Yeah.
you and I have spoken before. You know, we've hopped on calls and talked about coffee as a commodity. You painted me a picture of the Ethiopian ceremony of coffee. Do you think you could share it with our listeners? How it's presented?
Sure. Um, well, Ethiopian coffee ceremony is absolutely magical. It
Yeah, you said
starts,
that.
it's a bit of a portal that you walk into. You're invited into a ceremony. The first ceremony I was invited into was in the home of a Ethiopian family, and the ceremony was kind of arranged at the entrance of the home, and they invited over neighbors, and I was there with some colleagues of mine. We were visiting Ethiopia for a coffee trip, and it's you kind of see a, a large you see an aspect of coffee that normally is invisible to us in the way we drink coffee in the United States. So the coffee green beans, or that's raw coffee after it's processed, are roasted right then and there. The process takes around 20-30 minutes before you even are served. And incense is burned. It's an opportunity for everything to kind of slow down. Uh, when I
Mm.
was there, they invited their grandmother into the ceremony, and the mother, there's his aunts. So there's several members of the family surrounding us. When coffee is finally served, you always serve the eldest first, and you go in 3 rounds. Each round signifies a different aspect of kind of um, what we're reflecting on. And it's a chance to learn and listen to your elders. It's a chance to kind of be together in a way that's, I would say, really, really gentle. It's like we drink coffee
Mhm.
as a way to speed up in United States,
Mhm.
and it's like to increase our productivity. And this is really to slow down, to be more thoughtful, to to be together and just to enjoy the fact that we are together. And then to practice what it means to be in community, to practice what it means to be. I mean, if you're ever hanging out with Ethiopians, like hospitality is like valued
Yeah.
there. So they're really demonstrating how important it is to them by being so hospitable through the sharing of coffee to their
Mm.
guests. And to them, to have a guest is a really special experience. And I wish in the United States we thought about immigrants that way, and we thought about how important it is to have guests in our country and to learn how to receive them and how to share what's special about our country to them as a way to make them feel welcome. You certainly feel that in Ethiopia, and you can travel through Ethiopia by just going from coffee ceremony to coffee ceremony, and you would feel welcome everywhere you go, but you'd also learn quite a bit about each of the neighborhoods that you're traveling through.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. One of my best friends is Ethiopian, and yeah, I think I might have to go visit her and her family's. And now, as for a coffee ceremony on that trip, I didn't realize it was so thoughtful, and they roast it there and serve eldest to youngest over time. Like it sounds magical, quite truthfully.
Yes. Yeah, and they serve it with popcorn. It's called that. Yeah,
Wait, what?
they love popcorn, and uh, and also with bread, and so that's part of the
Yeah.
hospitality. It's like you're serving coffee, but you're also serving each other this food, and it's just
Yeah. No one leaves hungry.
wonderful. And that's actually just
No,
really a prelude to them eventually inviting you over for lunch or dinner. So
oh, how sweet.
it's just one step after another of an extension of hospitality. Quite beautiful.
It is. You've been very fortunate. You've mentioned some countries on this call alone that you have traveled to and visited that I think the average the average American, well, probably average anyone, might not have had the opportunity to go visit. I think you've definitely created a life and a career, it seems from my perspective, uh, dedicated to removing this commoditization around coffee and building these food systems that will better support coffee growers. And with it, it seems that you have enriched your own life so very much by having all these experiences, these very rich experiences. And I don't know if I have a question to say at the end of it, but it's just an observation of like a very, to me, beautifully lived life that you've kind of either found yourself on or have walked on by your own choosing.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel fortunate, and I think that's the reason why I kind of pay a lot of respect to coffee as
Mm.
something that's way more than a product. It's been um, this opportunity that's been given to me to travel around, to learn about. I mean, I was in love with reading National Geographic when I was a child, and I would fantasize
Mhm.
about going to visit different countries and explore and get to learn about new cultures, and coffee became my avenue to do so. And it's a great sector. I mean, it's, even though it seems like a very large sector, it's quite close-knit, with respect to the people that travel to different coffee countries.
Mm.
And, um, at least for me, it's been an absolute blessing. It's been a way that I've created friendships, and I've got to visit countries, and I've got to learn more about different cultures. And as you mentioned, it's been a gift. It's nothing I could have ever given to any of these countries could come even close to what I've received. And it's just a way of remembering what's important. Most coffee growing regions still are off the grid. So
Mm.
once the sun goes down, it's you're spending time with each other, you're telling stories, you're listening to
Wow.
sounds of nature. And then with the sounds of the roosters in the morning, you wake up and you just kind of get into this rhythm of being, associated with the land and understanding that there is a biocultural identity between people and plants. And coffee is very much that. If you go to Colombia, it's cafe cultura. It's like the culture of coffee is there at all times. And it's in the songs, it's in the food, it's obviously in their way to create an income and a livelihood. And so for me, it's been an absolute pleasure to just be invited into these places and to get to witness it.
So what can customers do? Like end consumers anywhere in the world, here in the United States or anywhere. What can we do to help support these farmers and make that food system a little bit more equitable across the entire chain?
Sure. Well, we talked a little bit about fair trade and organic. Uh,
Mhm.
their labels, then that's I guess like that's the quick and dirty way of just
Mhm.
being something and using those certifications as proxies for what's important to you. Organic being very much around the practices that the lack of agrochemical use in terms of cultivation. And I would say the fair trade being more so associated with cooperatives and ensuring that there is some support of creating and strengthening organizations of farmers so they can continue to be visible and compete in the international coffee market. Beyond that, I would say, buying local, buying from local roasters, buying
Mm.
from your local cafe.
Mhm.
Um, Direct trade is certainly a term that's used when we notice when companies have built long-term relationships with certain areas that they're sourcing coffee from. Um, and just really reflecting on your own values. There's coffees that promote women, and so women's produced coffees. There's coffees that promote youth empowerment. There's coffees that promote biodiversity or that are promoting reforestation programs. So to look behind, just to get a little bit more curious around your coffee allows you to essentially find more meaning in something that you're already consuming. If you're already consuming it, might as well align it with the values that you care about, and then you're able to practice those values, and hopefully that coffee will have more meaning to you over time. And coffee is expensive, right? So,
Mhm.
if you're spending, let's say, 20, $30 a month on coffee, that over time, over the course of your life, if you start drinking coffee when you're in the university and you drink it until you're 70, 50 years of drinking coffee, that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars that you spend on coffee. So
Good
you
point.
can invest that can be an investment in what you care about. It can be a way to build a relationship with a specific place that grows coffee and then take a trip. Go actually visit that. You got the
Ah,
means to do so. Uh, you
yeah.
will be welcome with open arms, and people
Oh.
can actually have I would say, a much more direct personal relationship with the people that grow their coffee.
So literally do perhaps an internet search for coffees. It's not just necessarily what's on the shelves at the grocery store. Maybe go online and type in coffee, women produced, youth empowerment, reforestation, whichever, you know, resonates with you and see what comes up and hopefully you're able to produce directly from that website. Is
Sure.
that,
That's
I
that
mean,
that
that pr the easiest way for one of us to
without
do
a
that?
doubt, yeah. You can also look at coffees if you're a diaspora from a specific coffee producing country,
Mhm.
you can find coffees that are sourced from that country. Um, Once again, focusing more and more on the smaller brands instead of the larger
Mhm.
brands, I think you'll have more of an impact. And those smaller brands are very happy to answer your questions and to kind of get more loyalty around the causes that they care about. And especially if you care about those same causes, then we actually start creating the seeds of a movement. And those causes don't have to also be in coffee producing countries. They could be local causes. There's coffees that support homelessness. There's coffees that promote
Sure.
civil rights of the LGBTQ plus community. There's all sorts of coffees out there that you can align with your values.
I have a couple last questions. Your university class at Carnegie Mellon, I hear is really popular.
And
I hear it's super popular. Tell me what you're doing for these college students that make it like people line around the block to try to get
uh,
in.
it's the class is called Coffee, Capitalism, and Consciousness. I teach it in partnership with Professor John Slory of the Department of History. And
Mhm.
we look at coffee as a system, just like I talked about before. And when you look at coffee as a system and you're able to think about the web of relationships and how it's configured differently, we look at that web of relationships with the narrative of coffee, like what the history of coffee is and how it's moved around the world, um, what the roots of colonialism are within the coffee
Mhm.
sector, and then how it's kind of morphed into a commoditization of coffee. We look at the narrative of capitalism and kind of the extent of the coffee sector. It's a $500 billion sector in the United States. There's 2 million jobs associated with the coffee sector, and
Wow.
it's a it's it's one of the most traded commodities in the world. And it's segmented in the sense that, yes, there is the commodification of coffee, but then there's also the specialty coffee segment, which is kind of the higher end coffees. And when people are cupping coffees and their specific flavor profiles, as a matter of fact, there was the purchase of I think recently, just like a month ago, 1 kg of coffee was sold at auction from a farm in Panama for $30,000. So, yeah.
What?
And it's like, so coffee has this other stratosphere of aficionados that want to have
Right.
rarest types of coffee in the world.
Gotta look that up. I gotta look that up. Why someone's spending $30,000 on a kilo of coffee?
Sure, it's a coffee it's a Gaesha coffee that comes from a specific farm um, in Panama. And and so there is this spectrum of
Yeah.
capitalism, you can say.
Mm.
And then lastly, the course is coffee, capitalism, and consciousness. And the consciousness is really first reflecting on yourself and what your relationship with
Mhm.
coffee is. I think, Claudia, you drink coffee?
I do.
And in the morning, do you have a moment with coffee when you're drinking it?
Oh, I don't know if I do. How about that? I love a good espresso in the morning, but do turn to the cup and I say thank you for, waking me up? I'm not sure that I do. But is that but do I need to? No,
I don't know. I mean,
I mean, but I probably should, right? Just take a second.
I think a lot of people maybe they don't even know, but they're in a ritual with coffee in the morning, and we're
Right.
and if
Yeah.
we're more mindful of that moment that we're having, and it's a moment of reflection. It's maybe a moment of planning on what's to come in the day. Uh,
Mhm.
It's certainly as you're preparing the coffee, it slows things down as you're going through the preparation of the coffee. The smell is, I
Mhm.
think, is that's very intoxicating for me.
Yeah, it is.
And so,
It is.
there is a level of consciousness that is affected when we are in relationship to coffee. And so, in our class, we try to reflect on how you were introduced to coffee as the first time you drank it or the first time you remember your family drinking it. Um,
Mm.
and then we introduce students to different narratives of how coffee might be cultivating us. And so we'll look at the narratives of Ethiopia and how coffee is drank in ceremony and what it means to practice specific values of hospitality or respect and community. We look at coffee perhaps being sentient and having a spirit, and what it means
I love that.
for coffee that is expressing itself through us. And we look at women in coffee in Rwanda and how that movement has kind of a, um, it's like a movement of kinship that came up and created visibility for women in the coffee sector that were typically ignored. So there is
Mm,
a consciousness that comes with how coffee is um, not just how our relationship with coffee is a relationship with a system. So when we have to remember, we shouldn't be thinking of coffee as an it's a we. And when we're drinking coffee, we are coming together. And
mm,
in that kind of transition from thinking of it as an and when we think of coffee as a commodity, it's very much an it. When we think of
mhm.
coffee as a, a conscious plant that is expressing itself in combination with ourselves, it becomes a we. And that is an opportunity for us to come together with plants in a way that I think is very special and allow us to really honor the places that grow coffee and the people that are really serving it to us.
Saurin Nanavati, thank you so much for sharing this really beautiful morning with us today on If This Food Could Talk. Truly, I think I've seen coffee now and I'm feeling coffee now as a different experience than it did an hour ago. So I genuinely appreciate you sharing your beautiful experience and time with us. It's just been very
Oh,
inspiring.
thank you so much, Claudia, for having me. I appreciate it.
Anytime. And I need to get you back on the show after I've had an experience with my um, Ethiopian friend. I'm gonna have that ceremony. I just definitely will, and then I'm gonna have you back on. And I do ask you to keep coming back on and let us know how things are progressing around the world and all these visits that you're doing, as well as within your classes. I hope that the fair trade movement, as well as the direct trade movement, grows in big part by you and your colleagues. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.